Welcome to the Significance of Wealth podcast, where we explore the evolving landscape of wealth management, private investments, and collecting as both a passion and investment strategy. I'm Marty Salt. Our guest today is Jesse Craig, co-founder and CEO of Acquire. With over a decade of experience in the sports collectibles space, Jesse played a key role in elevating trading cards into a recognized asset class during his time as an equity partner at PWCC Marketplace, now Fanatics Collect. At Acquire, he leads a white glove service model for collectors and investors, offering private brokering, strategic consulting, and high-end bidding services. Now let's dive in. Here's your host, Tom Ruggie.
Welcome to this edition of Significance of Wealth. I am so excited today to have Jesse Craig with me. And we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things, which is sports cards. And he has a fantastic history and knowledge about the subject. So we're going to get into it in some pretty in-depth conversations. But first, Jesse, I want to welcome you and would love for you to share a little bit about yourself, your history, and kind of what got you from where you started and probably as a collector, but to where you are today and with your company Acquire and what you're doing. Yeah. So some background will be fantastic.
Sure. Yeah. So born and raised in Oregon, still live here today. And I got a business degree from the University of Oregon, did a couple of jobs for a few years with different companies, and then started working in the trading card space. I collected as a kid, like most of us. Unfortunately.
When did you start working in the business?
It was around 2009, 2010. And so I graduated college in 2006 from University of Oregon. I'm 40 years old. And unfortunately growing up in the 80s and early 90s, didn't collect anything that's worth a whole lot these days, kind of the junk wax era, right? Yep. I started working for a dealer in the space back in, like I said, 2009, 2010. I did that until 2014. We had our first kid at the time, my wife, and I just kind of wanted to change of pace. So I became a realtor in the Portland metro area for 4 years. And then in 2018, PWCC had already moved up from the Bay Area to the Portland area in 2016. And my past in the industry, I knew Brent Higgins, the owner, and Brent back in 2018 offered me an equity position with the company to come on board and help grow the company. And that was in 2018. So, I was employee number 14. We built the company from 14 employees to 180 in 2023 when we were acquired by Fanatics. So while I was at PWCC, I ran our sales division as well as wearing many hats in the small business and as we were growing. But Fanatics came in, they acquired us, gave it about 4 or 5 months with Fanatics and just realized that going from 180 employees to 18,000, it's a lot more difficult to wield your influence on the business.
A little more corporate, huh?
A little more corporate. Yeah, and they're great. Honestly, they're great. We are, to this day, we're the number one from a consignor perspective. We have a great relationship with them. They're still great. It just wasn't for me, and I saw a need in the space from a high-end perspective and a private sales perspective. So, I took the best sales guy we had at the time, Brock Hayden, as my business partner. We left in September of 23 and we started Acquire. So we've been in business for about a year and a half now. And, we really specialize in the high-end market and consulting and kind of helping collectors and investors navigate space.
Yeah. And so maybe tell a little bit about your company. Is that a little more detail about what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So like I said, private brokering is a core piece of our business. We are able to connect buyer and seller. We know where a lot of big cards, whether it's vintage or modern, are hidden. And, we have a lot of big buyers that come to us to try to find those, said items. We have a lot of relationships with other people in the industry as well to help locate items for people. So we can kind of be a one-stop shop for collectors that are really looking for an asset. And, we have a couple of things that we do a little differently from a private sale perspective than some people in our space. We don't charge more than 10%. We're very transparent about our fees and we will cut into those in order to get a deal done. We're in this long-term, right? We want both parties to be happy. We want them to come back. We want repeat business. So, we try to do it the right way and not gouge anybody and, make sure we're compensated obviously for the work that we've done, but, we don't charge more than 10%. We've had many deals where we could have, right? But we don't do that. And then, that's one component of our business. Another component of our business is the consulting nature of it. So, gentlemen will come to us with a collection and they might be looking to sell, they might be looking to hold, but they want advice on what to do with their stuff. And so navigating the ins and outs of the private space, the auction space, Like I said, we're one of the biggest sellers with Fanatics still, and that is because of the consignment nature that we have to our business. People will give us cards to sell through other platforms, and we manage the whole thing, and they can just come to us as a one-stop shop. We fund as well. So if guys, maybe they have a $500,000 card they're after, and they have a bunch of cards laying around that they don't care as much about, and they want to kind of call it trading up into a piece that they really want. Well, we're able to front the money for the sale, take on the consignment, and then ultimately we charge a small fee for the money float. But then ultimately we sell those cards and we pay down the loan, and they get the Grail card that they wanted.
Wow, I love that concept. Yeah.
It is. And look, we're not the first ones to come up with it. We've added it on to our business. But, when I was at PWCC, we were the first people ever to lend on trading cards. We built out, a credit facility. We had a bank that gave us a $170 million loan, and we were able to build out a lot of lending, and the first people to ever lend on trading cards as a tangible asset. So, those are a few components to our business. And I'd say the last one that's fairly popular as well is we bid on other people's behalf. So if you are a celebrity, if your name is well known for political reasons or financial reasons, and you want to stay anonymous, well, we will bid through our account for you. We consult and talk to you before the auction closes, figure out what your maximum is that you want to spend, and we bid on your behalf. That works from an anonymity perspective. But also, if you're just traveling the world or you're unavailable one night and for 2.5%, you're like, yeah, I want to get that card. Happy to pay your fee for you to manage everything for me and do it. Well, then we can do that as well.
Or you don't want to stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning, like you have to after some auctions out there.
So, long time, that's for sure.
They do. So let's talk about the market a little bit. I mean, obviously it's been an extremely hot market, really since COVID in particular. But to me, being deeply ingrained in the market, it's really had significant increase in valuations over the last 10 years, just really COVID and came around, and then a number of things like we talked before we started the podcast about the valuation of Michael Jordan stuff and how the Netflix series had something to do with that. What have you seen develop over the last 3 or 4 years, and has that changed your perspective from an investment standpoint for these type of assets, or how you're running your business? What's changed since then?
Yeah, great question. I think, obviously we had the big run up when COVID started, right? The Michael Jordan documentary came out that kind of set everything on fire. And the issue with that is that all the, what I'll call junk, the junk was even worth a lot at that time, right? Everybody and their mom was involved in trading cards during COVID because people had nothing to do. And so the wrong stuff was going up in value, and it created a bubble. Now, what I've seen since then is all that stuff has come crashing down to where it should be.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that is not important. You have random guys in the NBA who their base cards are going for $200, and right now you couldn't sell one for $10. Like, those are the kind of guys I'm talking about, right?
Right.
So now what we see is the best of the best is shining. It's going for big numbers. There's a lot of people that came into the space that had the means in 2020, 2021, and they've stuck around. There's more people coming into the space today to have means. And so it's really simple economics. As long as they're getting consulted in the right manner and they're going after the right stuff, well, there's only so much supply for that stuff. And I think we're going to have a real issue in our space down the road with supply for the best of the best. I just think there's just not enough of it to go around. So I'm seeing that stuff doing better numbers than it did at peak COVID today,
right?
Which it should. It's the right stuff. And the stuff that was doing peak numbers in COVID that was the wrong stuff, that's still suppressed and it's staying down. So, money is moving into the best of the best, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah. I mean, as a collector, that I would like to think that I'm buying the best of the best. I can concur with you that the prices, I'm not seeing a 10 or a 20 or 30% reduction in the sort of things I want, which I keep on thinking maybe that'll happen. And I could give you a couple of examples, but I did not bid on a 52 signed Jackie Robinson for years and years because I thought it was going to go down, and it just never did. And so finally I bit the bullet and perhaps even overpaid for it. But nonetheless, I have it now and I'm happy, but it does happen. So going back, and you touched on this a little bit, but maybe if you could expand. I mean, you started Acquire. It's very unique, at least from my perspective. It's a very unique company. But what was the rationale that led you to start that? I would have to assume there were some pain points that you saw among people like myself and high-end collectors and whatnot. So, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So we're very transparent when we talk to people, when we give people advice. I don't like dealing with headaches or problems. So I would rather somebody not buy something and, than buy something and be unhappy. Right. So, being at an auction house, one of the biggest auction houses in our space, especially for trading cards, we were number one in the space for a few years. You see pain points. You talk to a lot of high-end collectors. Even though our core business was an auction at that time, we still did some private sales. And that was something when I was there that I was trying to push more that didn't really land as much with Brent Higgins, who was the majority owner of our company. He, wanted to rely on the technology of our auction house and that a little bit more than the personal relationship that comes with a lot of this, concierge business that we're doing. So I saw a need for it, talking to a lot of high-end guys that are looking for cards. They can't find them. They're just waiting for them to come to auction at that point, or they're trying other brokers in the space where there's some good brokers in the space and there's some bad ones, right? There's some guys that do it right, some guys that don't. And so just coming to the market with a company that was transparent, that had the means to actually find pieces for individuals, I thought was important. And to be able to, not charge too much, because there's also brokers in the space that just flat out charge too much, or they're not transparent with what they're charging. So I felt like there was a lack of that in the space, as well as a lack of transparent advice. Like, look, I don't have a crystal ball, right? I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I don't know what's going to go up or down, but I feel like I've got my finger on the pulse more than the majority of people in the space that are going to give, insight to collectors or investors. And so leading them in the right direction, having people buy the right stuff as well, not just blindly buying things that someone brings to them, but giving people advice that can help, give a better ROI down the road on their collection is something I thought was really needed as well. And so that's why, that's the path that we take in this business. It's just fully transparent. I'll tell you something you don't want to hear if I think it's right. I'm okay doing that, but it's just our opinion too. And we're not always right. That's the reality as well.
I mean, that actually is almost an identical answer to if you were to ask me about my family office or my wealth management business. It really kind of just goes hand in hand. Find that
Yep.
comparison pretty interesting. So, regarding that and regarding working with individuals, and you work with buyers and sellers. So, what are some of the mistakes that you really see out there, and that both on the buyer and the seller side, that would lead somebody to come to you and say, "Hey, listen, I'm going to trust your judgment on this. I'm going to trust your expertise to help me to either find what I'm looking for or to build something that I may not have thought I was going to build." But my assumption is that people are having some difficulty doing it on their own, or they're making some mistakes, and I'm sure you see that in the marketplace.
Oh, totally. So I'll start with selling side. From a selling side perspective, we have, what I always tell my clients is, look, you can get free advice from me, right? Just text me, just call me. If you're looking to move a piece that you own through someone privately, I will tell you if it's a good deal and you should take it, right? Like I don't need to get involved in the transaction. I don't need to get compensated. Like, I want you to do well as a collector and an investor. Like I said, long-term relationships, right? You do better, you stay in the space. It's not rocket science. So I will give people free advice and tell them if I believe an offer is good or not. When guys don't utilize me for that, typically they regret it, because I actually sometimes will have a buyer that can get more money for it than them. And I'm not here to step on anybody else's toes, but if I think I can get you more for a card, I'm going to tell you. If I think it's a good number and you should sell it, I'm also going to tell you, right? So from a selling perspective, there's guys where, I give them a good offer privately on an item as well that could happen, and then they auction it and they get less, right? But you run that risk at auction. Everybody knows that. It's always a risk when you send a card to auction. There's the unknown. You don't know. So when you're selling stuff privately, what I always tell people is, look, if there's a number that you're happy with and it seems fair, I would take it and I would not run the risk. But if you're a gambler and you want to take that risk and you think there's more upside, then ultimately you have to live with the results. And so you can see there's stories on the positive and the negative that can come from those exact scenarios, right? Sometimes guys risk it and they do well. Sometimes they risk it and they don't do as well. On the buy side, it's the same thing. We have some of our own inventory. We do buy cards as a company. We have a rule with that as well, where if we get a card brought to us that any of our clients are looking for, we obviously offer it to them first. But if we have collections or, cards brought to us as a company, we don't have a client looking for it, we can offer on those and buy those. So we've had our own inventory that we've offered to clients at X price. And then we as a company go, we'll just auction it. And then they auction for more, so, these guys could have gotten a better deal privately buying it through us, but we ran the risk at auction and we benefit from it. And sometimes it sells for less too, right? Than we were offering it for privately. So it can go both ways on that as well. So there's no crystal ball, like I said, there's no perfect science for it, but just being able to consult with somebody that has their finger on the pulse and that's in the market every single day and here's, what buyers are looking for and what sellers are looking to get rid of can kind of give you some insight with a simple text or a phone call as to how hot an item may or may not be.
So I mean, it sounds to me that what you're doing, I mean, to some extent, you're a competitor of the auction house, right? But at the same time, you also can be complementary to the auction house. I mean, if I've got an item and I bring it to you and I'm like, hey, should I send this off to one of the major auction houses or should I look for a private buyer? If you're providing the advice on that, then to some extent, aren't you competing with the auction house?
I guess ultimately, if you're looking at it as, hey, if you sell this privately, it's not going to go to auction. Sure, you could call us a competitor of an auction house. We also send the auction houses a ton of business.
Yeah,
Right.
I bet you do. Yeah, so I said it's complementary as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and look, we have great relationships with, everyone from Fanatics to Golden to Heritage to, Brian and, Calvin over at REA and JP at Memory Lane. We know, Drent over at Mile High. We know everybody. And so we have good relationships with everybody. We utilize, a lot of auction houses to sell stuff. And we'll be honest with our assessment and where things should sell too, because that's also a piece to the puzzle is I believe that certain auction houses have audiences that are more beneficial for certain cards than others. And we'll help people navigate that as well.
So there are times where I could bring an item in. You might be, hey, there's a lot of demand for this. And, to me, I've always felt like the auction house is really it's the ultimate valuation of something because you've got, assuming it's a large enough auction house, you have so many eyes on it. And the bottom line is it's supply and demand. So if somebody wants something bad enough, they're going to pay for it. But it would seem like for those type of items, I would feel like you would probably say, hey, let's work with an auction house. But correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like some of the one of a kind stuff is really where the big risk would be potentially going to an auction house because it may or may not reach the expectations that somebody would want. And if I had a one of a kind item, you have a buyer for that. That seems to be where that really comes in and fits well.
Yeah. I mean, it only takes two guys at an auction for an item to go crazy, right? Two guys want it.
Yes, I've been there and done.
I'm sure you've been one of the guys, right?
I have.
Yeah.
I probably will be tonight.
Yeah, exactly. So it only takes two guys at auction. Now, you're right. There's a risk that if you auction it, one of those guys isn't in the room and it takes two guys for an item to go crazy, right? One guy, it's not. So what the private sector, what happens sometimes though, and why a lot of this stuff doesn't go to auction, especially the one-to-one stuff, is because the seller doesn't necessarily want to sell, right? They're open to hearing an offer. And if they get an offer that they're comfortable with, they would rather sell that than run the risk at auction because they weren't really looking to sell in the first place. And so we also tell our clients a lot of times for this really rare and unique stuff that you probably can't find anywhere else, it's very difficult to locate, that the private market's more expensive than the auction market. Because a lot of times the only way you're going to pry an item out of someone's hands is with a strong offer privately. Otherwise, it's not coming to market.
Yeah.
And so the private market, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, right? So the private market is much different than the auction market in that regard, where, you're really having to kind of step up, even though the last comp 6 months ago on a card might be 150,000, the seller might want 175 to 180 privately because go find another one, right? And they're not really looking to sell. So they're like, well, I want a premium on the last auction because I'm not looking to sell. You came to me, right?
They're holding the cards.
They're holding the cards. Exactly. Yeah. Visibly literally holding the cards. So that's where they kind of differ. You can take the risk and run it at auction, or they can take the guaranteed privately. And from my experience on the really rare stuff, guys feel way more comfortable selling privately and not risking at auction. And like I said, you talk about us being a competitor in an auction house or a friendly, a lot of these cards that we move privately where the guys will not auction them, our funding business actually brings consignments in for that. And those consignments go to the auction house. So the auction house is getting business they wouldn't get otherwise. Even though that card didn't go to auction, the same value is being replaced in other items that are going to auction because that item ultimately moved.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
So,
and we talked a little bit about, and there may not be much expansion on this, but if there's certain items that are more conducive to a private sale, I don't know if there's any further expansion on that. But the second part of that question would be, do you have any horror stories or success stories on either side of the equation that would be beneficial to hear?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to the previous comments about, offering cards privately and then they go to auction and they go for more than they're being offered privately. Like we just had, for example, it was a pretty rare Ronaldo. It's a 2014 Prism Gold World Cup card that was offered privately for 120,000 to one of my clients. And ultimately and there was a comp from about a year and a half ago that was, I think, in the 50 or 60K range. And they just didn't feel comfortable paying 120,000 for it. The market has changed a lot on those cards. There's a lot of demand for high-end soccer right now. I think we all are kind of seeing that as the biggest sport in the world. Well, how is this not caught up on cards, right? And Ronaldo was obviously one of the greatest soccer players of all time. So, I knew the demand for it privately and I thought it was a fair ask, but he ultimately turned it down and my client decided to auction it. It went for 160,000 at auction the next month.
Yeah.
So, there's stories both ways. Like I kind of mentioned before, there's times I often someone a card privately and it's too high. And I think, we'll be transparent with both our sellers and our buyers as well. Like if there's a card, because like I did real estate for 4 years, I treat this as a fiduciary responsibility to both parties that I'm representing. Just like if you're handling both parties of a transaction in real estate, you have an obligation to be honest with both of them. And we do that. If I think an ask is high, I'll give a fair valuation on it. And I'll say the same thing to the seller. I was like, okay, look, you're asking 200 on this card. I think it's closer to 160 to 175, somewhere in that range. I'll say the same thing to the buyer. It's no secret. I do believe in long-term relationships. And I just think that's the only way to achieve that is if you're fair to both parties.
Yeah, makes sense. So, what are you seeing today? Because again, this has changed the dynamics. I mean, it seems like it evolves on a monthly or quarterly basis. But what are the real hot areas that you're seeing today? And along the same lines, is there more the new versus vintage? That's always a big topic of discussion. And, admittingly, I'm a pure vintage collector. I'll pick up a rare piece here and there of something more modern, but I'm typically a vintage collector. But what's your thoughts on what's hot? And at the same time, is what's hotter, rare, vintage versus new?
Yeah, I think we're at an interesting inflection point in collecting, to be completely honest with you. I think that the vintage stuff has been a little more stale as of late, except for the best of the best. And I think that Jordan's stuff has been crazy hot. Remains hot, right? He gets the most notoriety of any athlete because of the Jordan brand, being the greatest basketball player of all time.
The GOAT.
Still a large superstar. He's the GOAT. He's the GOAT, right? And I don't want to hear any of this LeBron garbage. And I'm a
No, he's the F-time GOAT for probably any sport.
Exactly. And so, and internationally is, obviously one of the most recognizable athletes that have ever lived. So Jordan stuff is very hot. There's some core collector groups that are obsessive over certain athletes. Jordan's one of them. Kobe's one of them. Messi is one of them. And when you have these obsessive core collector groups, it really helps raise the floor on some of these cards because these guys, they'll buy multiple copies of things, right? They'll protect auctions. And so they'll protect their investments. And then if a really rare version of a card comes up, they go ballistic over it because they know it might be their one chance. And they've been waiting for 7 or 8 years for this one-of-one Messi to come to market. And so I think that right now what's hot is a lot of the ultra rare cards of the GOATs, call it even Wayne Gretzky. Some of his shield cards are very popular. Even I've got some interest in one of his, PSA 10s lately from the 79, Topps Oro Peachy.
I'm seeing a lot of Peachy Gretzky's come on the market lately.
Yeah, which is interesting. And that's another topic to talk about. It's actual supply versus perceived supply, right? You look at a 2000 championship ticket, Tom Brady, and for those of you, people watching this, if they're more vintage guys, rookie year for Tom Brady's 2000. It's his serial numbered Patriots uniform rookie card that's autographed. And it's very condition sensitive. There's a lot of chipping that goes on and flaking on the foil on the card. But that's a card where they've turned over a lot in the last 2 or 3 years. There's only 100 that exist. And a lot of these cards, you expect on average, maybe 5 to 10% of the supply maximum to change hands every year. If you look at Jordan PSA 10s, kind of the same thing. You'll see 5 to 10% of something, just roughly 15 to 30 that hit the market every single year. hotter years when, when big comps hit the market, like right now they're trading for around 190 to 210,000 for a Jordan PSA 10, for example. If that card goes up to 400,000, you're going to see a flood of supply. It's going to ultimately drive that price back down, right? It's, like I said, simple economics, but it's just interesting to see like perceived supply and how that affects value versus actual supply. Because if you look at, there's a 1997 PMG, it's called a Precious Metals Gems Red Jordan. Those are numbered out of 100, but really there's only 90 reds. The first 10 are green. Some people on here might know about that. Are you familiar with that card?
I'm not actually.
Okay, so the green variation, there's only 10 that exist. I've got a buyer that would pay over $5 million. It's a very important card from the 90s. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but there's 90 reds. Well, you only see maybe 2 or 3 reds that auction every single year. I mean, you're talking maybe. And whereas Tom Brady's, you'll see 15 championship tickets, 10 to 15 of them. So they have basically the same supply. But Tom Brady's collector base isn't as deep as Jordan's.
Yeah.
So the perceived supply is actually greater than the actual supply. Like I'm looking for a red PMG Jordan right now, and I can't find one.
I'll say who are. You got a buyer for $5 million. We're looking for it now too.
Yeah. Well, look, I know there's one guy that owns 4 of the greens, and he's not selling. There's only 10 that exist, and he's not selling. Actually, there's only 9. One was destroyed. But yeah, it's kind of wild how perceived supply and actual supply can really dictate the final sale price of a card.
And my guess is if one of those came to auction, that the person with 4 would still be bidding on that one as well.
1,000%.
Yeah.
1,000%. Yep. Because he probably wouldn't mind having 5.
Wants to monopolize it. That's right.
That's right.
And you mentioned that earlier, and it's funny. I actually, collect signed cards, in particular vintage, but there's been occasion that I've bought duplicates because I bought the original one and paid a lot of money for the first one ever to come. And then the second one came out, and because to your point earlier that there might have only been 2 real bidders, but it would be half the price. And I was like, I'm not going to let that go for half the price. I'm going to monopolize it and buy it myself. And I've done it several times.
Right.
Yeah.
And you lower your cost basis, right? Now your average cost basis is maybe somewhere in the middle between it's in the middle between your 2 purchases. But I've got a lot of investors too that, they'll identify a card they like. Usually it's cards with supply under 100. And they'll just pick up multiple copies if they believe in it as an investment. And as long as you're willing to hold, right? You're willing to hold for 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be, where the supply dries up and you build up that demand. It's been an incredible investment strategy for some of these collectors.
That's exactly what I tell people. I speak about this topic a lot at various speaking events and interviews for magazines and whatnot. But it's funny, you're in the real estate business, and I use the same comparison for quality sports investments, which is similar to real estate. You can go buy the best property on the beach in Florida today, but if your intent is to flip it a year from now, you might have a great success or you might be down significantly. But if you're buying that top property and you say, hey, I don't have to do anything for 10 years, I can virtually guarantee you're going to do perfectly fine from an investment standpoint. And again, I think with quality items in the collectibles arena, I think the same holds true. And it sounds like you agree with that.
Yeah, look, you make your money on the buy, right? But ultimately, every client's different. And so once I get to really know my clients as well, I can help them navigate it even more because, I have one client specifically that I know he cannot hold a card for more than a year. He just likes the action. So when we go to buy something and I think he's paying a premium for it, I have to advise him, this is going to be a very hard card for you to move in a year for a profit, right? Now, if it's a guy I know is going to hold for 5 or 10 years, I'm still transparent that he's paying a strong number for it to get the card, which ultimately sometimes you have to do that just to get the asset. But he's going to be fine in 5 years, right? It's overpaying 5 or 10% to get an item when you have that chance. You got to do it, right? You got to do it. And if you're a guy that's going to sell in a year, don't do it.
Agreed. 100% agree. Yeah. So 2 quick industry questions. One is, what are your thoughts on the current parallels and the one-of-ones and the patches? And, I see this, and again, I'm biased because I am a vintage collector, but I see this and I'm like, okay, this is a cool card. It's one of one. It's a patch, but they can make another one of one patch next year or whatever. What are your thoughts on what some of the card companies are doing? And again, you mentioned the green versus the red, and there's a lot of that going on as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as the space grows, people talk about overproduction and overprinting, and I think Fanatics, they have that. They bought Tops about 4 years ago. Fanatics did, right? They are getting so they have the MLB licensing. They're getting the NBA licensing either this year, next year, and then football the opposite. I can't remember which one is which, but they have a tough job. Trying to manufacture the right amount of supply to meet the demand of the market without overproducing is difficult. It's not easy. I do believe that all these one-to-one variations, these crazy, you go from, for Bowman baseball, for example, your red rookie Bowman chrome refractor out of 5 autographed, that's like a flagship rookie card for a baseball player. Your one-to-one superfractor is your best card, right? There's only one that exists of that. So, but you have these color variations. You have the red out of 5, you have oranges out of 25, golds out of 50, and so on and so forth. Well, then they throw in, once the demand gets high enough, and they obviously want to make more money as well as their business, you throw in the wave the wave variation where it looks a little different, but you still have all those colors. And then you start throwing out, now Prism basketball, they have a snake skin variation and a cherry blossom variation to speak to the Chinese collecting community. And there's all these variations. It feels like overkill, but it won't be overkill if Fanatics can accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, and that is bringing the masses into the space.
Yeah.
What this really does is short term, it creates confusion, I think, in the space, because people don't know long term what's going to have collectability and what won't. So what I always tell my really high end guys is you stick to what you know best. That is, they have the core, the 101 black for a player, right? They're out of 10 gold variation. Whenever they start making a product run, Prism came out in 2012, for example, and golds out of 10 were introduced in 2012. That's the first time golds were introduced. Those still exist today. They still make those for cards. Panini is losing their licensing, so they won't exist anymore. But then in 2018, I believe, they introduced black gold. Those are out of 5. So from a logic perspective, you would imagine that an out of 5 variation is going to be worth more than an out of 10 variation, right?
Right.
Not the case. Because collectors like the gold because it's an original piece of the product run that happened for Prism. And these out of 5s actually sell for 50 to 65% of what an out of 10 copy would.
Wow.
Because set collecting, as it started with the PSA set registry, right? With vintage cards. Well, guys are starting to do that for modern cards too. They will try to collect the whole set run of 2012 Prism Golds, or maybe they want to collect every LeBron James Prism Gold that exists. So they'll buy a 2012, a 13, a 14, and so on. Well, if you do black golds, you have to start at Luka's rookie year at 2018. You can't even go back and do stuff from 2012. So there's a lot of weird nuances like that in the space for the more modern stuff that make it a little more challenging to navigate. But look, we have experience dealing in T206s and rarebacks and factories all the way to this ultra modern stuff. As an auction house, like, I've seen everything. PWCC stood for pre-war card collector, and that was the beginning of the auction back on eBay, was selling T206s.
Yeah.
And, we morphed into one of the biggest modern card sellers in the space because that's where a lot of the hottest cards were, and there's more turnover in that space than there is in the vintage world. And so, as an auction house, naturally, you're getting more turnover in that stuff. You're selling more of it. You're learning about it and knowing where things are hidden and tucked away. And so, we've done a lot of modern stuff as well, but we have expertise in a little bit of everything. Yeah.
Well, Jesse, my last question, you just brought it up a little bit, is the PSA registry. So I have a love-hate relationship personally with PSA. I have a preference for my autographed card collection, which is the significant part of my collection. I have a preference for it to be PSA. I do have 4 or 5 sets on the PSA registry. I think that's a great thing, for at least for me and for what I'm looking to do. Yet there are so many different dynamics within PSA that, to be candid, I get very frustrated with them about a number of things. And the question isn't really revolving around PSA. I'm just using this as a platform to put my disgruntles out there. Where do you think the authentication and the grading is going with all the different companies, and kind of, and you hear a lot about AI and the impact that's potentially going to have. And so, in your business, what do you see in there? I mean, again, obviously, I think PSA is still what they call it, the 1,000-pound gorilla or whatever, but
Yeah, they are. I think PSA, another company that's got a tough job, to be completely frank, right? There's a human element in grading. We all know that. You talk about AI, and I don't think AI is going to be perfect with grading either. I think that a human element as a check and balance is always important,
Mhm.
right? Whether it's AI that originally grades it and there's a quality control from a human perspective, I think it really is yet to be seen how much AI can affect our space. But don't think that PSA wouldn't get involved if the industry standards started turning to AI, right? Like we have, who's a great guy in Nat Turner and one of the biggest collectors in our space, he's at the helm, and ultimately we're believing in him to carry the ship that is PSA in the right direction to be better for the market. Beckett cost themselves a lot in the last 4 years by not doing things the right way, not responding to issues, right? Our market still to this day, there's no regulation. There's no, it's the Wild West still, it's a collectible. So PSA again has a hard job, and a lot falls on their shoulders. And they're the only grading company that has a buyback guarantee, right? The only one. Now I know they don't have that for autographs, but I don't know if you even knew that their autographs actually, I don't believe, have a buyback guarantee. But it's not an easy job. And I think PSA is going to continue to be the leader in the space. Look, I have my finger on the pulse from what investors are looking for, and they're all looking for PSA. I mean, that's the reality of it. So, for me, it's much easier to move a card in a PSA holder privately than it is an SGC. Even though I love SGC, I love all the guys, and they might be the most accurate grader, in my opinion. PSA has to deal with a lot of politics too, right? Like they've been around the longest, and they have cards that are in very old holders. I believe that, they can't ever say this publicly, but I believe grading standards have changed. I mean, I guess they did just change their centering standards publicly, but grading is a lot harder than it used to be. Naturally, they've seen more cards. They've gotten better, right? So I think that there's some very interesting things with the maturity of our space, and also the maturity of the companies that are helping legitimize it. And PSA is a prime example.
Well, appreciate your feedback on that. So I will close it out. I'll first of all ask if you have any final thoughts, anything that wasn't discussed that you think would be worth bringing up. And then secondly, I'll offer for you to provide any contact information or website information or whatever you would like to, if anybody listening to this would like to get in touch with you.
And I appreciate it. I mean, look, I would say the general statement is, if you're not in this space every day, living and breathing it, it can be frustrating, right? There's a lot of little niches and different niches within it. Just reach out to us. We're happy to consult and help people navigate the space, whether business comes out of it or not. Having people that are educated in the space, buying the right stuff, doing it the right way is important. It helps. It's like a rising tides, right? So you can reach out to us. We're on Instagram, ACQ. It's acquire spelled ACQUIR, no E at the end, .co. That's our Instagram handle. You can email me, just JESSE at acquire.co. Those are the best ways to get a hold of us. Also our website, acquire.co. We're happy to have conversations with people. We like to take our time and educate them as much as they need. And so, an introductory call to reach out. And if you have interest in starting in the space, or you've been in it and you just want some advice, or you have some cards you want our opinion on, just reach out and let us know.
Very cool. Well, thank you again so much for being on here with me. Really enjoyed it. I frankly feel like we could have talked for another hour or so, but that's a great conversation. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. That was fun.